then what was your mindset with going over the border essentially into Iraq when you got that?
Yeah,
call?
so I guess you're pretty focused. I think you're pretty focused. I had concerns at that stage about things like vehicle reliability, weapons reliability.
Just on that, how were the tanks holding up in the desert at that point?
So the CVRT, certainly my troop, held together very well, and I had a really experienced, troop sergeant and team, and very good mechanics, and they work well. I think in the desert environment, you've got to keep maintaining things. You've got to change the air filters and basics, but actually they work well. So we didn't have any issues. But that's one of the things you worry about, right? You don't want to break down the wrong place.
Yeah.
I think the thing I was most surprised about was when we started going through sort of brigade level rehearsals. One is the scale of it, and I've got some pictures we'll look at later. When you look at the bridging equipment, the artillery, the AS-90s, the US augmentees, the Cobra attack helicopters, because I was looking after forward air controllers and snipers. So,
wow.
We got to engage with them. And I think on the day we were told we were crossing into Iraq, after there'd been a sort of naval, suppression of the Iraqi military, air suppression, was that actually crossing the burn was led by combat engineer tractors. So I thought, Recce will be first, but no, it was the tractors, armored JCBs that you'll be familiar with.
Yeah, that's cool. And then you cross over the border, and was it what you expected? Because
I didn't really know. I think I wouldn't. I think given what our colleagues who went and did subsequent tours experienced with the insurgency, I think for Telic 1, I'm careful with my choice of words, but for us, it was high intensity, but the conflict element for my brigade was limited. We were up against an Iraqi conscript division that had essentially, after they'd been, softened up with US air power, had essentially, dropped their stuff in their shell scrapes, tank holes, and left. So a lot of the positions that we were scouting and looking for were actually empty. There wasn't any resistance. There were a few sort of pockets here and there. I remember at one point we'd league it up, and literally, we were shaving, right? We were shaving, and there was some small arms fire came around the squadron leader, and it was one or two people taking a pot shot, one or two sort of RPG attacks, but they were quite long range, so low risk. So relatively, for the first few weeks, as we sort of encircled and had to put a blocking line north of Basra in place, that was relatively went to plan. There are few, I think there's some minefields that you engineers cleared or at least marked for us, but it wasn't high intensity conflict. That was to come for others. Yeah.
And how long was your time in Iraq?
So we did. So after the sort of initial first few weeks, we were there for I think around about 4 months, and then we sort of moved just north of the Shatt al Arab. We moved into a sort of fixed location, and then the time was really spent on what I would describe as denial activities. So, we didn't want insurgents to get their hands on Iraqi stocks of ammunition, weapons. So spent a lot of time looking for them, searching houses, and sort of destroying or taking armoured vehicles out of action. And then also trying to build some trust with the community. The success of that has been seen since then. But at that time, we were very much as a coalition in a honeymoon period.
Okay, yeah. Then you get told, I'm guessing, to come back. Are you handing over the vehicles, or?
Yeah, I think we handed over the vehicles. So yeah, then I think we're told right, we're heading home. And I think very much so. I think there'd been a feeling at that stage that the first tranche of units had actually was time to pull them out.
Yeah.
And get new formations in. And yeah, so I think it must have been around about June 2003. Came back, I think, I can't remember exactly how we got back, but handed our vehicles over, got back to Kuwait, flew back. I think we stopped in Cyprus for a day or two, decompression. Got back to the regiment, and then literally I had decided in Iraq to leave the army.
Okay. Why? What was your mindset then?
And the simple reason was that during that tour, I'd heard that the regiment were moving to Germany, and Germany had always been a red line. I spent time there as a child. I didn't want to go and live in Germany, and I think that there are moments in life where you just got to make a decision.
Okay.
I would have loved to have stayed, but the time was up.
Right.
The clear was, go to Germany. I thought we'd moving south to the south of England, but I decided, so I sort of withdrew my extension papers with the adjutant and got back, and they, basically my time was done. Went back to Catterick, regimental cricket match, got in my Citroen AX, drove to London.
Wow. Okay.
That was that.
So you made the decision whilst you're out on tour.
Yeah. Very much so.
So there were they trying to like dangle carrots and try and entice you to stay?
No, I'm pretty clear on my. No, I think one or two said, do you want to think about it? But I think I was pretty fixed.
You were
when I make a decision, I make a decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what year is this? Is this
so this is middle of 2003? So
2003.
Still 2003.
Oh right. So as soon as you come back.
Yeah. No decompression.
Oh, wow.
Just get on with it. My actual time ran out in August 2003, but I then quickly transferred into the reserves.
Okay.
So I went down to London.
Right. Yeah. So you come back, you transfer over to the reserves. Now, what is that process like? Are you essentially filling out some paperwork and saying, right, I'm leaving the regulars, now put me over on the books for the reserves?
I can't remember what happened.
Can't quite remember, no?
I think it was pretty seamless, and I think back in the day, it was a few phone calls between people based up in Glasgow.
Okay.
I suspect now there's all sorts of paperwork to be done.
Yeah, but you don't have to like leave to then join.
No, it was fairly seamless because I think, I left and decided I wanted to leave. I didn't actually have a plan.
Okay.
But I had to justify my existence somehow. So I decided to go and do a master's in London. So I went to London to do a war studies degree at King's College London. And that made sense, therefore, to go back as a training captain to London Officer Training Corps.
Okay. So you're a reservist.
Yeah.
And then you're overseeing the Officer Training Corps.
That's what I did. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what rank are you when you're doing that role?
So then I was captain. Yeah.
Captain.
Yeah.
Was you a captain before you left?
Yes, as I left. I was a captain when I left. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So what was it like being on the other side of? It is UOTC, isn't it?
University Officer Training Corps. Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. What's it like being on the other side? You're not the cadet as such.
Yeah.
You're in charge.
Well, I was never the cadet, but I think I didn't really think much of it because the reality was that why did I do it? I needed to pay my way, right? And if I could do some good and I could add some value, it made sense to do it there. And if I could contribute and encourage people at university to join the army, then I saw that as a good thing to do. And I think I had some good experiences to share. I also think that, from a practical side, it's flexible employment. So, I got paid for doing it, paid for the privilege of having flexible work, being in an environment I enjoyed, but meanwhile, getting on with my civilian life.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you're just studying.
Studying, I did some various bits of work in the city to just get work experience. I kept my eyes open, looking around the world just to sort of think what move I would make next.
Yeah. What made you choose the Masters in War? Or is it a master?
War Studies.
War Studies.
Actual Masters was in Intelligence and International Security, and the reason for my interest was because there was a lot of talk around intelligence failures relating to 9/11, intelligence failures around Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction.
Uh-huh.
And so in the academic discourse, there was lots of questioning around these issues.
Yeah.
Why were wrong decisions being made? What was the information being presented? And why was it wrong? Or why were the wrong judgments and decisions made? And understanding and unraveling that. And so it was the first course of its kind. And we really got into the grips of it. I mean, if you look back at things like Pearl Harbor, complete intelligence failure. You know, there were junior officials saying, hey, look, there's a problem here with Japan. No one listened.
No.
Look at the end of the Cold War. I mean, the Cold War was one of the biggest, geostrategic issues for decades, but no one saw the end of it, despite all the investment in intelligence gathering and capabilities.
Yeah.
We missed it.
Yeah.
Right. So this was interesting to me.
Yeah. Nice. How long was that in total?
So it's a year course. Yeah.
A year.
Yeah.
And what happens after that? And what happens with your reserves?
Yeah. So then reserve carries on. It's good. After that, I then moved to the Philippines, where I worked at the British Embassy in Manila.
Okay.
I was, a project manager, looking after what were called counterterrorism programs, but actually they were more sort of police training programs, and I did that for a few years.
Nice.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, fantastic. I
enjoyed
mean, a new part of the world. Again, Asia Pacific is one of those places that's often forgotten, but huge potential, really interesting, diverse cultures, and a great few years where I could put together my experience in the military, working with a sort of civil service, working in an embassy. Yeah, good experience.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
Come back from there. Did you want to leave? Like, because sometimes it's
Want to leave where?
Philippines, because like sometimes you enjoy a place so much.
An opportunity came up, and I actually went. I went to Afghanistan as the chief of operations in the Helmand Provincial Reconstruction Team.
Okay.
So I was there as a civilian for Herrick 7 with 52 Brigade, Herrick 8 with 16 Brigade, Herrick 9 with 3 Brigade. And then for the best part of about 7 years, my professional life was taken up with issues around Afghanistan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So were you back and forth?
No, I lived we did the way it worked for civilians. We did 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So we do 6 weeks in theatre,
okay,
and 2 weeks off. But I think it's often missed. It's important to know that, I had colleagues there for 7 years non-stop doing 6 and 2. So while the military rotating every 6 months, the civilian cohort who are out there working alongside them are often doing many years.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously you've got your background there with regular and reserves. So what's your mindset there? Because obviously you're there as a civilian.
I think
individual.
So I think again, what people sort of often miss is that for the military, Afghanistan was for all of us, it was a tough gig, right? But as with all of these types of conflicts, it's a civilian-led mission, and the military are in support. And I think sometimes when you're in the military, it's easy to forget that because you are the dominant footprint, but actually you're supporting civilian objectives.
Uh-huh.
And I think what the civilian advisors are doing out there is trying to pull together all the various levers that exist, with the United Nations, with the government of Afghanistan, with the communities, to try and get them to function, with the military providing the security space for them to work.
Yeah.
So I spent, best part of a year out there, and then would go in and out on a relatively frequent basis, but more like every 3 months or so, often do an assessment, touch base, see how things were going. And I also spent some time in Uzgan with the Australian Army, helping them to kind of replicate what we were trying to do in Helmand. So I spent a few months in Tarankot working with Australians, which was great as well. Yeah.
Nice. And then what's happening with your reserve aspect?
So all that period, so in terms of my reserve service, when I went to the Philippines, I went on what's called the unposted list, which is essentially your service is turned off, then you turn it on. When I was in Afghanistan, again, I was still unposted, so your file's on pause. But when I got back to living back in the UK on a more regular basis, I sort of turned it back on.
Okay.
And I did a few more years, this time as a company commander back at the OTC, because of a place I knew well. It was flexible and it was good fun, for all the reasons I've articulated. And I did that for a few years whilst carrying on with my international work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were like double hatting, like
Yeah. No, I mean,
Very-
no. Yeah. Keep things compartmentalized.
Yeah. How did you cope with that? How did you cope doing that?
I think probably with an officer training corps, it was different to if I was in a teeth arm reservist organisation, just because it's non-deployable.
Mm-hmm.
You're working with good people, but the reality is the culture's different. I didn't mix it. Never mix the two.
Okay.
So I would turn up as Tony,
Yeah.
in my civilian job, and turn up as Major Hulton in my reservist job.
Yeah.
But I didn't. There was a very clear boundary, and I don't think people either side knew what I was doing on.
Really?
I don't think they knew what I did in the day job or what I did in the evenings.
Wow.
And they didn't need to know.
No. And so that final promotion to major, that was with the final posting as such.
Yeah.
In that role.
Yeah.
And then how was it for you as a civilian going back and forth to those different locations? Was you coping okay?
Yeah, I mean, I did that and went to many other countries. That's kind of my profession, my job. I sort of working within international development. Takes you back to what I was talking about Uganda earlier, but actually sort of working to try and address some of the most complex challenges in the world at a community level. So when I was in Uganda back in after my gap year commission, it was around looking at AIDS to Afghanistan, about stabilizing communities, stabilizing the system, to work that I've subsequently done, running a vision eyesight charity in Africa, to what I do at Walking with the Wounded, which is, trying to solve some of these intractable issues that seemingly unsolvable. And I think, military service really helps to get your head around these issues.
And at what point was you thinking, I've been double hatting, I've got to major? What was your moment in life where you thought, you know what, I'm gonna hang up my reserve hat for good?
Yeah, so I never made a deliberate intent to leave. I always enjoyed it, but I then moved to live in Zimbabwe and went on the unposted list. So I think the system threw me out. So I was there for 3 years, but you could only be on the unposted list for 2 years.
Okay.
And so I came back after 2 years, and there was a sort of letter saying, "Thank you for your service."
Right.
So, well, I mean, I think they probably lost out there.
Okay.
But I had no intent to reach, to get the paper. Going back to your question about when I transferred, it was how easy it was. I wasn't going to go through the process of rejoining. By this stage. I had kids and busy life.
Yeah, fair enough. And so you mentioned Zimbabwe. You lived out there for a bit.
Yeah.
Doing similar kind of work.
Yeah, I was working on the internationally. I spent a lot of time working on Lebanon. In fact, I worked on Lebanon for about 6 years. I was working in West Africa. Again, looking at sort of helping to sort of fix communities that have been impacted by conflict, either locally or nationally, in one way or the other, and deeply impoverished communities where there is a sense the world has left them behind, and there's both an immediate issue on the ground that needs to be fixed, water, food, shelter, education, work, and then there's a strategic thing about getting the politics and the structures to work to enable those communities to function. So those are the issues that I've been working on.
Yeah. So you've mentioned the Walking with the Wounded a few times.
Yeah.
What do you want to share about that charity?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm hugely privileged. It came at, I guess it's sort of serendipity that something lines up when you're not expecting it. But I was moving back from living abroad last year, and I thought, you know what, I'd like to work with veterans. And as you would have got from this conversation, a lot of what I've worked side by side with the military my entire career, majority is as a civilian, and I've seen firsthand, one, the service that the military provide to our country, but also the versatility in terms of trade training, in terms of ways of thinking, in terms of problem solving. And I think when you know that there are some veterans out there that life isn't going to plan, I think there are organisations that need to be able to help with these issues. And at Walking with the Wounded, we do just that. We work with the most vulnerable veterans, those who life hasn't gone to plan, isn't going to plan for whatever reason, for various reasons. And we at Walking with the Wounded are able to, provide that holistic, personalised wraparound care that includes support for mental health and therapy, to what we call care coordination and social work, just getting, housing in order, debt sorted out, getting people registered with GPs, whatever it takes. And then once that's done, to help get them into work. But importantly, working with employers to recognise that, yes, we've got someone who's quite vulnerable and needs some support when they get in work, but actually they're going to be a huge asset to your organisation once they're firing on all cylinders. So, that's what I do, and that's what we do at Walking with the Wounded. It's an amazing team of dedicated staff. I've got a fantastic team. I say to them that they make my job easy by being absolutely great and focused. And I, really want over the next 5 or so years for us to be helping more and more veterans, really vulnerable veterans who, for whatever reason, life just hasn't worked out in the way they were hoping.
And when did the charity start?
Yeah, so Walking with the Wounded was founded by my predecessor, Ed Parker, back in 2011. So this was in a time of Afghanistan, and the public were seeing wounded servicemen and women returning to the UK. He had a nephew who was a double amputee called Harry Parker, who was in the Rifles. And Ed felt he needed to do something. And so, he did. He organised a trip to the Arctic. The Duke of Sussex joined. He was serving at the time in the Army Air Corps. And they raised a lot of money, I think more than they were expecting. And so from this sort of what I think might have been a one-trick pony actually has over time really professionalised. And thanks to that team who just kept pushing things, the early staff just kept pushing things forward, putting these issues on the agenda, and morphed into what we've got now, which is a nationwide charity, an NHS provider to Op Courage, with hubs up in North Shields, Manchester, and down south, just outside Salisbury. Presence in Belfast and in Northern Ireland and Scotland, to a group of people doing great work for great people.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Now, if anybody does want to reach out, what's the best way of them doing that?
So the best way is to visit the website www.tw.org.uk and call. There's a telephone number. You call, some will answer.
Okay.
If we can help you, we will make every effort to be able to help you. And if your need is something that's outside our core competence, we will definitely sort of hand you over or recommend where you can go for help.
Yeah, that's good. I'm also guessing you could just search for the name. And
search us online, Walking with the Wounded online,
and it'll pop up.
Definitely, yeah.
Brilliant stuff. I think we pretty much brought us up to date now. Nice, short and sweet. Now, I just want to ask, from your time in the military, maybe as a regular, more so as a reserve, because it sounds like you were more busy in that time. Is there a story you'd like to share with people that stands out, like a moment that you think, this would be great to share with veterans or great to share with others? Maybe a proud moment of yours. I don't know.
A single moment, gosh.
Like a great story that you'd talk to people down the pub about or something.
Yeah, I'm not very good at that, Gav. I need to.
No?
I think my whole journey, has been one is and continues to be what I would describe as a worthwhile adventure. I think there's might be one, and I think it's relevant to some of the work that Walking with the Wounded does now, around sort of mental health support. It was when I was as a civilian in Helmand, and the organisation, government department in London that paid for me, said it was really important that I checked in with a therapist. And I think I thought, I'm fine. Why would I do this? But I remember having this call with someone, and it wasn't a positive experience at all, because, and it goes back, and I'll circle back to Walking with the Wounded on it, because the first thing was that they clearly didn't have an understanding of the context of where I was working. So there's no pre-brief. It was a sort of someone at the end of a telephone line. Oh, Afghanistan sounds interesting. Tell me about it. And then it's when they asked me how I got to work. And I sort of said, well, if I've got to go and visit another office, a fob, I get on a helicopter. And they went, oh, that sounds interesting. It clearly, and then through no fault of that person, no fault of their own, there was a break in the system about providing support to individuals. And I think what we are doing at Walking with the Wounded is making sure that veterans get therapists who understand what they've done. So when you say I worked on Herrick, they'll go, I understand that. You don't need to dwell on it if you don't want. You don't have to explain the context. And that means you can actually get to the nub of the issue much quicker than having to retell your story.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that's a pub story, but when someone says, "Oh, that's interesting. How do you get to work on a helicopter?" So, well, clearly, there's a lesson there.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Well, Tony, this has definitely been a nice thing to hear. It's also brought us to the point in the show, your episode, where we can get some advice from yourself. So the first bit of advice would be for anybody thinking of joining the military. Might not be the army, but have you got any advice for people joining?
Definitely. I think firstly, I would absolutely encourage you to do it. Go for it, all in. I think it's a great experience. And I'd encourage you, I'm thinking about this on the train, to read the news from a quality source and understand what's going on in the world, to keep fit, and to read books. Because what we do as soldiers, sailors, airmen and women is about the big issues in the world. And the more we understand, whatever rank you are, about that, I think the better the job we'll do when we're on the ground.
Yeah, so that's good advice, that is, for sure. Next bit of advice is for veterans.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned the charity, but do you have any other advice for people out there?
Sure. I think there's I think many veterans kind of rightly label themselves as service leavers, and actually many people, employing people, will bracket you as something they perceive you to be as a service leaver. But the skills and experiences you have achieved and learnt over your service are gold dust to employers. And I think you've just remember and have the confidence that, you are agile, you are quick thinking, you can turn your hand to most things, and you're used to solving problems. And that is gold dust to an employer.
Yeah, it's good advice. And it's that mindset. It can be difficult for people in some ways to blow their own trumpet, right? When you are in that mindset of you just get on with the job as a soldier, as an airman, whatever it might be, blowing your own trumpet can be difficult.
Never a good thing.
Great. How was it for you, Tony? How was
Gav,
it for you? Coming on the
great.
show?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, you hadn't done something like this before, have you? Sat down,
Not with a microphone in front of me, no. Not this close, at least.
Not this close. But thank you very much for sharing everything that you've gone through from all the way back when you were in the regulars and you know, a young officer, all the way through to where you are today. And also giving up some of your time. You are a very busy person, so thank you very much for giving up your time for the show.
Well, Gavin, thank you very much.
No problem. And lastly, I say this to all my guests, thank you for your service.
And thank you for your service.
No problem at all. No problem at all. But it's been great. Thanks so much, Tony.
Cheers, Gav.
This has been Military Veterans Podcast. Out.